Morning, guys. So today we're going to continue with our study of how World War II affects the U.S. and U.S. society. Remember that other than yesterday, so far in this unit, we've mainly been focused on the effects of World War II, the causes of World War II in Europe. We've also studied the Holocaust and effect of an effect or a part of World War II. All of those events, though, have been concentrated in Europe. This week is all about bringing it back to the U.S., understanding what the effect of World War II was on U.S. society. So with that, let's get started with our learning target for today. I will be able to explain how the U.S. used propaganda to raise support for World War II after the attack on Pearl Harbor. So let's start with this term propaganda, which you might remember from World War I. Propaganda is videos, posters, any kind of media designed to spread a particular message. Governments often use propaganda. They use videos, posters, other kinds of media to spread a particular message about a conflict during wartime. So we're going to be looking at examples of propaganda today from World War II. Our goal today is to understand how propaganda was used to raise support for World War II after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor is a term which is new for us. Pearl Harbor is the event which draws the United States into World War II. Remember that at the start of World War II, the United States was not involved in this conflict. To give a quick overview, between 1933 and 1939, we've studied the rise of Hitler and some of his aggressive behavior. So yesterday, you guys listed those as part of your Blast from the Past RTL. That included violating the Treaty of Versailles, the treaty from World War I, invading other countries like Austria, Czechoslovakia. Hitler's aggression between 1933 and 1939 is concentrated in Europe. And though it makes the US worried and it makes other European nations worried, nobody does anything about it at first. That's until step 2, Hitler invades Poland. Once Hitler invades Poland, France and Great Britain join in the war to fight against Hitler. Okay. France and Great Britain by 1939, after the invasion of Poland, are involved, but the US is still, remember our lesson from yesterday, still remaining neutral, still staying out of it. Then comes the attack on Pearl Harbor by Japanese forces. Japanese attack Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor is the name of a Navy base and also a town in Hawaii, which is part of the United States. If you scroll to your second page, you'll find a map of where Pearl Harbor is. So this is the mainland US, and then out here, the US many years ago claimed a number of islands known as the Hawaiian Islands. Hawaii is a state, part of the US, and on Hawaii is where Pearl Harbor is located. Once Japan bombs Pearl Harbor and destroys many ships, kills a lot of people, that's when the US officially enters World War II. So our job today, if we zoom out and look at the entire learning target now, our job today is to explain how the US uses propaganda to raise support for World War II after Pearl Harbor has been attacked. So before we jump into the activity instructions today, I do have a video that gives you a visual overview of what occurred when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. I'm going to share my screen. Just be patient for 1 second, guys. And before I play the video, I do want to briefly review the context on your second page of your daily packet. Pearl Harbor is a U.S. naval base near Honolulu, Hawaii. That was the seat of a devastating surprise attack by Japanese forces on December 7, 1941. Just before 8 a.m. that Sunday morning, hundreds of Japanese fighter planes descended on the base, where they managed to destroy or damage nearly 20 American naval vessels. A vessel is a ship, including 8 battleships, over 300 airplanes. More than 2,400 Americans died in the attack, including civilians, and another 1,000 people were wounded. The day after the assault, President Franklin D. Roosevelt asked Congress to declare war on Japan.
The 1941 bombing of Pearl Harbor by the Japanese was one of the most devastating attacks on American soil. But just a few decades earlier, Japan and the United States were allies in World War I. So how did things get so bad between them? It all comes down to oil. To explain, we need to go all the way back to the 19th century. Once an isolated nation, Japan underwent a makeover of sorts to compete with the West. Known as the Meiji Restoration, it embraced industrialization, built up its military, and restored Japan's emperor as the powerful head of state. Aided by 2 successful wars, Japan aggressively expanded its empire. The Japanese were becoming an imperial superpower until the Great Depression hit. You see, Japan is an island nation with few natural resources, so it depends on international trade to keep its economy afloat. The economic crisis put a stop to all that. Japan was in a bind, so its military leaders, who called the shots at this point, decided the best defense against financial ruin would be a good offense. They would invade nearby China, particularly Manchuria, for its plentiful resources like iron, soybeans, and land. Lots and lots of unsettled land. So what does this all have to do with the United States? Well, the US was a long-standing Chinese ally, and it watched uneasily from the sidelines as the 2 nations clashed in the 1930s. But America wanted nothing to do with another war, so it just denounced Japan's aggression. Tensions rose in 1937 when Japan invaded the Chinese city of Nanjing. In doing so, they attacked an American gunboat, killing 3 and wounding dozens. Disturbing images coming out of war-torn China further swayed American opinion against Japan. In response, America attacked Japan's resources. They imposed economic sanctions of aircraft, scrap metal, and other items crucial to Japan's military. The US hoped the sanctions would stop Japanese expansion, but Japan doubled down, invading French Indochina in 1940 and then teaming up with Germany and Italy. Why those 2 countries? Because like Japan, they were controlled by militaristic governments, obsessed with conquest and driven by a deep sense of nationalism. The final straw came in July of 1941, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt announced a trade embargo on oil. An oil shortage was an absolute disaster for Japan, who relied on imports for 90% of its supply. Not only would this destroy the Japanese economy, but it would put its military at a literal standstill, which meant no more expansion. Japan resented the US for meddling in its quest to dominate Asia. The only solution left for the Japanese was total war. Crush the US fleet in the Pacific and then occupy Southeast Asia and claim its resources. And so, on December 7, 1941, Japan launched its surprise attack at Pearl Harbor. At first, it seemed like a win for the Japanese, destroying or damaging 21 US ships and more than 300 aircraft, and killing around 2,400 soldiers, sailors, airmen, and civilians. But the success was short-lived. The United States declared war on Japan on December 8, 1941. Not long after, the Japanese would realize the mistake it made at Pearl Harbor. Their bombers had failed to deliver a mortal blow to the Pacific Fleet, missing oil tanks, ammunition sites, repair facilities, and aircraft carriers. Just 6 months later, remnants of the US fleet would score a key victory against Japan at the Battle of Midway, turning the tide of the war against the once mighty Japanese.
So immediately after the bombing at Pearl Harbor, the US enters World War II, but it's not exactly ready to enter World War II. So to raise support for the war, it uses propaganda. During World War II, the American government used propaganda to spread its message. To control the content and imagery of war messages, the government created the Office of War Information in June 1942. The OWI created various themes for posters. There are 6 themes, and each theme is explained for you here. The enemy, the nature of our allies, the need to work, the need to fight, the need to sacrifice, the Americans. You've got 6 themes here. Your directions are listed underneath your Analyzing Propaganda poster graphic organizer. Directions, they're highlighted for you on the screen. After the US Navy station Pearl Harbor in Hawaii was attacked by the Japanese Army in 1941, the US finally became involved in World War II. The government quickly began to publish propaganda posters to mobilize Americans to action. Using the posters on this link, complete the graphic organizer below. You're completing 4 images. So you're going to click on the link to the images first in order to see the propaganda posters. And you'll notice that each slide has 2 posters. Your job in your daily packet is to answer each of the questions in the graphic organizer. So first, simply list 5 visuals, words, actions, famous people that you notice across the posters. 5, not 1 or 2, 5. Then in the center, what theme from above does the image set best fit with and why? You have to pick which of these propaganda themes do those posters match up with and explain why. Finally, the third question, what are the posters trying to get the audience to do?